Can you hear me? Okay. Hello, everybody. Let's get started here. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? We'll give those in the back just a second. Okay. Can you hear me now? Everybody hear me? Okay, great. Anyway, welcome and thanks for coming out. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everybody, one of our longtime members, Mike Maselli, passed away this year, and we have an exhibit dedicated to Mike in the museum. So when you get a chance, you could check it out at the archaeological display here at the Heritage Center. Before we get to our guest speaker, Josh Broussard, I have a few announcements. First of all, Wednesday, October 19th, we'll be taking a field trip / hike to the Jimmy Camp Corral Bluff site east of Colorado Springs. Our chapter, and this is in tandem with the Colorado Springs chapter of the Colorado Archaeological Society. And the Colorado Springs chapter has been unable to fill their spots. The Pueblo chapter, we filled all our spots, but there's some spots left. So if you were thinking about taking that field trip, let me know and I can get you the details, because we do have a few spots left. And that, again, that's October 19th. And that is a Wednesday. It's about a 3-hour hike and tour through the Corral Bluffs Jimmy Camp area. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, October 21st through the 23rd, is the annual meeting of the Colorado Archaeological Society. The Northern Colorado chapter will be hosting this event in Loveland. There will be presentations, workshops, and tours of local archaeological sites. The conference schedule starts on Friday with a CAS board meeting. Saturday is filled with interesting presentations, a silent auction, networking opportunities, lunch, happy hour, dinner, and a banquet speaker. Sunday is dedicated to tours of local sites arranged by the host chapter. And it is possible for those that are unable to attend, we might be able to have a CAS annual watch party here at the Heritage Museum, where we can watch the keynote speaker on the screen. We're kind of trying to work out some of the details with the CAS Colorado Archaeological Society. So watch your emails and hopefully we can get that put together. Carla, did you want to say something about Alice Hamilton?
Yeah, I would like to note that the Pueblo Archaeological and Historical Society is a chapter of the Colorado Archaeological Society. The Colorado Archaeological Society, which is having their annual meeting toward the end of the month, has a silent auction that helps to raise funds for the scholarships we give to archaeological students here in the state. And if anyone has items that would be suitable for a silent auction, they might be books, they might be artwork, they might be a regifting of something that was lovely but just not for you. I'll see me and you can email me and I'll come pick it up. The meeting is the 21st, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm going up on the 20th. So I can pick it up between now and then if you have items that might be suited to that event.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Thursday, November 3rd, 7 p.m., our next month's membership meeting. Join us here at the Heritage Museum for a presentation by Ray Sumner, who is a PhD candidate in anthropology at Colorado State University, Fort Collins. And his talk is titled, "You Can't Study the Past If You Can't Find the Past." And you'll hear about Ray's research, new research into the days after Colorado's darkest day, Sand Creek. Ray will speak on the current work on the Julesburg project, Julesburg Station in Camp Rankin, located in northeastern Colorado along the South Platte, that became the focal point of the Native American response to the 1864 Sand Creek Massacre. This location was chosen by the Cheyennes as as the initial and last battle of the 6-week campaign in the early 1865 due to its isolated location and abundant stage company warehouses. Really excited about this, and we've been kind of reading about that in some of our book club books. So this ought to be a really interesting talk. December, there'll be no membership meeting, but there will be activity. So keep your eyes on the midden and emails for details. In January, we'll be having our annual holiday party with member presentations. And I want you to keep in mind, if you've had a fun or interesting trip this year, or visited an interesting archaeological or historical site that you'd like to share with PAHS members, we do have member presentations at our January holiday party. So be thinking about that. And if you're interested in telling about your experience, let one of the board members know.
And the date of that party?
It'd be the first Thursday in January. Monday, November 28th, the PAHS book discussion group will be discussing the book Wauwatoya and the Taos Trail by Louis Hector Gerard. And this classic is a firsthand account in history of the Taos Revolt and life with the Cheyenne Indians and life with members of the character of many of the characters we have become familiar with from this area. And I don't know if they have that book for sale at the museum or not, but if you're interested in that book, it is. Okay, great. This is really an interesting book. And Louis Gerard was a 17-year-old kid who obviously came for money, but wanted to go on an adventure. So his parents gave him a letter, and he got to ride out to, signed up with Saran St. Vrain's wagon train going to Bent's Fort. And he spent a year out here living with Cherokee Indians, got to go down to Taos after the Taos Revolt and witnessed the hangings. And it's a firsthand account, and it's really good. So if you get a chance, pick that book up and join us on November 28th at 6:30 p.m. And that will be a Zoom discussion group. Oh, and don't forget, also our PAHS research library is open now. So grab a little card back there and take a picture of it and check out the books we have in our library. If you have any questions about our library too, Brad Patterson is here tonight and Peggy Colgate, and they'll answer your questions. I'd now like to introduce Joshua Broussard. Joshua is a paleontologist and geologist working in the Canyon City area with the many important and historic fossil sites around Fremont County and the Front Range region. On his free time, he enjoys many outdoor activities and learning about history. This interest in history prospered upon moving to Colorado, with a great interest in the Old West and mining, turning from a hobby into part of his work, educating the public about the geology and history around them. Please welcome Joshua Broussard.
Started the PowerPoint your thing. All right. My head's too big for this thing. I think it might be hot air or something. I don't know. All right, so let me get PowerPoint started up.
Is that microphone working?
No.
The Zoom microphone.
Is it?
It doesn't amplify for the room, just Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, I can speak up.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So like you said, my name is Joshua. I'm a paleontologist by career, geologist, and I moved to Colorado about a year ago from Mississippi Gulf Coast, where I'm originally from. And I've always had an interest in geology. Mining comes along with that, and Colorado being the silver state, and also things like gold and copper and every other kind of metal you think of being mined here. That interest just pretty much grew from there. So I want to talk about the mining history of Fremont County, Colorado, because that's where I work, and I live in Canyon City, which is going to be the main focus of this talk for a good reason, because that's where most of it happened, was Canyon City area. Come on. Okay, something's going on here. There we go. I think that was, oh, okay. I guess it skipped a picture. So this is the type of field work I did back whenever I was back in Mississippi. This is my job. I get to get muddy and dirty and dig in the dirt. Here is more of me doing field work. This is from a master's thesis. Some of the same. This is just what I do as a geologist. This is also what I do as a geologist. Just wading through a creek. That was fun. I don't do much of that anymore though, because now I live kind of in the desert of Colorado. So this is not my first time in Colorado. This is me back in 2017. I did some field work over a summer in Pitkin area, Colorado. I love that little place, and if it didn't snow 8 feet in the winter, I would probably live there. But this is in that area. This is 2017, and then last year I got to visit that same little cabin in that old mining town, and it's still there. And also, like I said, enjoy outdoor activities. This is last year I was camping at Cache Creek, Colorado. Very good place to prospect for gold and also camp. More exploring historic mining places. This is an old mine near Pitkin, Colorado. I think this was the Bonton mine. And I do tours and stuff for the public on the weekends. This is out in Garden Park, Colorado, giving a tour of one of the fossil sites out there. We do those pretty regularly. If you check the Royal Gorge Regional Museum's website, we usually announce whenever we're about to do another tour, and you can come join one of them. And then even in my free time, I'm doing crazy stuff like this. This is Garden of the Gods, and there's a lot of people taking family photos, and I'm sitting in the background doing dumb stuff like this because those are really cool formations there. All right, so just the geology of Colorado and why Fremont County and Canyon City area has a lot going on in the way of mining. So we got the state of Colorado, and if you notice on the eastern side of Colorado, let me get my cursor over here so people on Zoom can see it. We have more of our flat plains region. Pueblo is over here, and then as you get more towards the west, you get more of those Rocky Mountains. And Canyon City is about right here. So we have a little bit of those plains, a little bit of high desert, but we also have quite a few mountains. And with Fremont County itself, like I said, here's Canyon City. We have more of our mountainous area over here in the reddish. I actually don't know why this map's colored red. I guess that was just, I don't know. I just found this about 10 minutes ago. And then we got more of our plains area over here on Highway 50 towards Penrose and Pueblo. And then Canyon City is right there on the edge. And for those of you unfamiliar or you're looking over Zoom, this is Canyon City itself. This is kind of right in the, not really the center of Fremont County, but close to it. But the big thing about Canyon City and the way it's easy to find on a map is it's surrounded by what we call a hogback. This is basically a narrow and tall mountain. And we have one that kind of encompasses the entire town. Pretty cool. I live next to it. It's pretty neat to have a mountain in my backyard. I'm going to bring this up again. So I figured I'd talk about it just at the beginning of the presentation for those of you not familiar with the area. But this is Skyline Drive. This is a really good example of what we call a hogback. It's just a very narrow, tall ridge that surrounds Canyon City. And this one's a tourist attraction because people drive on it. And we can still do that. It's a little sketchy. Yeah, apparently people are driven off it too, which is terrifying. Yeah, now it was opened in I want to say 1905, roughly. So it's been around for a while. All right, so the earliest mining that happened in Fremont County was done by natives. This is a picture. It's a little hard to see because of the lighting, but this is actually a petroglyph. This is out near Indian Springs Trace Fossil Site. But you got, it looks like a tree. You got a branch off here, here. There's a little one here. But from what I've been told, this pictograph actually represents the local river system in this area, depicted as a tree. Really interesting. But Native Americans, they used a lot of these early rocks for everything from pottery to coal, things like that. What do they call that? Paint, making paint. I don't know why I couldn't remember the word paint. An interesting method of mining that was done not just by Native Americans, but even by early Europeans was what's called fire setting. You basically light a fire up against the rock, and the rock contains moisture. And when you heat up moisture, it tends to vaporize, and it'll physically fracture and crack off parts of the rock. And early Europeans used to do that underground, which I don't recommend. That's not a good idea, but they did it. Out in Temple Canyon, near Canyon City, you see one of these old beehive ovens. I think this might have actually been a coke oven for making domestic use coal. You basically bake the impurities out of coal. It could also have been used for firing clay for making bricks or pottery. These are pretty multi-use ovens. And I actually still have not figured out where in Temple Canyon this is. I'd like to find and get a better picture. This is out near Coal Creek, where you have a coal seam just coming out of the hillside. And this was collected by some of the earliest settlers of Canyon City, as well as some of the natives that used to live here. They would just take it straight out the hillside because it tends to just pop right out of the ground. Well, we got to start off with oil, of all things. This is one of the first things mined in Fremont County, if you call it mining. A lot of people wouldn't think about that, but the West's first oil well, and in fact, the second oil well in the United States, was drilled right north of Canyon City, actually in Garden Park, right up here, right along 4 Mile Creek. So the story behind this is there was a man named Alexander Cassidy who got this. It's a long story, and just like everything else in the West, it involves sketchy dealings and theft and all kinds of other stuff. So from what I understand, he bought it from somebody that got it as a veteran's homestead. This guy was a Civil War veteran. Somebody else got it or jumped the claim. This guy got run out of town because he was a con man, and Cassidy bought the well property back from him for, I think, $40 in a revolver because of the West. So he actually drilled a small well here, and it ended up being a seep, an oil seep. Oil wasn't exactly shooting out of the ground. It was kind of slowly leaking in. And it produced 1 to 3 barrels of oil per day. Very slow. This is actually the first oil wells casing right here in Canyon City. As the river eroded away at the bank, it eventually exposed the old casing from 1862. And this is a picture of it in 1950. And you see all this old oil soaked into the sand right here. Geologically, this is honestly kind of strange. It's basically just a big puddle of oil was stuck in a layer of sandstone. I don't know how, but it was. Shouldn't have been there, but it is. Anyway, so it eventually dried up, and he tried to drill a few more wells in that area and didn't really get much. So he got more into the business of drilling water wells around Canyon and Rockvale, Brookside area. And during the coal mining, he was drilling a water well out near Florence for one of the coal mines there. And at 1,000 feet struck oil. This is the first oil spring. It's really hard to see, even when there's not trees in the way, but that's where it is. It's private property now, so I don't have any up close pictures of the site. But there's a plaque out there. If you're driving through Garden Park, you'll see the plaque on your left if you're coming from Canyon. Anyway, he found the Florence oil field, which to this day is still going. If you drive out there and get lost in the middle of nowhere, like where I found this oil well, you'll find it. So the next big boom that came in Fremont County was coal, and coal was the dominant thing that was mined here for decades. First, we got to talk a little bit about how coal is formed, just a little bit of basics on geology. So with coal, coal is formed by carbon-based life. Usually this is plants, algae, things like that. So usually you have a swamp will exist, then it gets buried under sediment, and all that dead material turns into peat. Peat's a really dirty, basically crappy form of coal. Then it turns to lignite, and then over time, with more burial, heat, and pressure, that turns into coal. Another way to think of it is coal has different grades to it. So peat is our lowest one. That's just kind of consolidated plant material. Then it goes to lignite with heat and pressure and time. And then over time, it continues to bake and bake out more impurities and become more high grade coal. And we get bituminous coal. This is the one that was common in the Canyon City coal field. And if you get it a lot of heat and pressure for a while, you get anthracite coal. We don't really have that here. There's a lot of anthracite mined in West Virginia. That's your highest grade coal. It produces a lot of BTUs and really low emissions. So a lot of the coal mining done in Fremont County was what was called room and pillar. So you basically drill in kind of a grid pattern. It's not always square, exactly like this one is, how you have 90-degree angles. But you basically dig out and create these pillars. And then once you've dug out everything in the area, then you come back through and take out the pillars and just let the roof collapse in. With mining, especially with some of these coal mines, you have vertical shaft mines where you get into a cage or what's called a skip, and you go down in there and you get off and you do work and everything comes up through a vertical shaft. Quite a few of the coal mines were actually what was called slope mines, which is just an incline slope. You just walk down the slope or take a cart, it doesn't matter. And then you got open pit mines, which are just an open pit. I don't know why that's there. So coal mining is pretty much unchanged. Like a lot of stuff, you drill a hole, you pack it with explosives, you blast it, and then you pick up the pieces. That's basically how it's done. That's basically how most mining is done. And previously, before there was electric tools, there was manual drills, of which I actually brought one. This was actually used more for hard rock. I bought this in Cripple Creek, but this is a hand drill. Let's see if people on Zoom can see it. Basically, you sit there for 8 hours a day and you hammer this and rotate it and hammer and rotate until you get a hole you can pack explosives into. So, yeah. Yeah, it's very low tech, but it works. But obviously, electric and pneumatic tools came along. So, like I said, you drill, you blast. There, you can get deep into the weeds now. There's so many different types of patterns to use. Coal versus hard rock. There's different methods of mining and blasting. Just another pic. These aren't from Fremont County, by the way. These are just ones I found online. But this is what it was like in a coal mine. You're basically just taking this crumbly, unstable rock that is just in the ground and you're trying to get it out of there. And it's producing a lot of dust and it is very hazardous. Most mines, whenever you get the coal out, you got to get it to wherever it's going to be distributed from. Usually that was done via railway. There were a few what's called wagon mines in Fremont County where they just hauled them via wagon. But when you are trying to dump and separate your coal by size, because that's usually how it was sold, by size, this is what's called a tipple. And most coal mines used a tipple. You basically, they have different designs, but the basic way they work is you dump your mine carts out, your coal, and the pieces of coal physically separate into different sizes, different carts, and then they get hauled away via rail to wherever they're going next. Now, lighting underground, because there's no sun underground, there's no light. Now, if there is light, there's a fire, and that's bad. And you should probably leave. That does happen. Coal does literally spontaneously combust sometimes just because it's volatile. It's actually a big problem with coal mining. Anyway, this is one of the earliest forms of light in mining, and this is called a miner's candlestick. And like the name implies, you stick a candle in this and that's it. It's a candle. That's not a lot of light. But the reason why it has a little spike here and a little hook here is so that you can poke it into the wall of coal, so you can just hang it up somewhere, or you can take the hook and hang it on something, or you could hang it hypothetically on your hat, I guess. But this was their only method of lighting. And if you've ever actually used a candle light a room, it's not a lot of light. Well, later in about the late 1800s, these came about. These are oil lamps. There are pictures of some of the miners of Fremont County using these. They were better. They lasted a little bit longer and easy to use, but these put out a lot of soot because these were using petroleum-based product. And then And then over time, after about 1900, I believe, we came out with these bad boys. I don't unfortunately have any picture of the miners using them in Fremont County because a lot of the mines closed up. But this is what's called a carbide lamp. Some of you may have seen one of these before, but these are really clever little lamps. These are used in mining. I think some people still use them for caving and mining, which to me is insane because these don't give out a lot of light either. Basic concept of how these work is this bottom part unscrews. You put in chunks of calcium carbonate in it. You open this up, put your water in, and then this little thingy on top adjusts how much water you want to drip down. That water physically drips down onto the pellets of calcium carbide. They produce acetylene gas, which is flammable, and mine's missing the nozzle, but then you literally just flick that little thing and you got a flame and creates light. It's not a lot of light. It's not much better than a candle, but it's a heck of a lot safer. And one of these, you only had to fill up about twice per 8-hour shift. So really simple, but these became really popular and they're pretty collectible nowadays. Well, in coal mines, you have something called dangerous gases because, like I said, coal is full of volatile stuff and it likes to decay. As it decays, it can create things like methane, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and actually the process of blasting. And this isn't just a problem in coal mines, but just blasting alone can create toxic gases. So a lot of miners were immigrants, and a lot of terms in mining are descendants of Welsh, Irish, German, Slovakian, just a mixture of different languages. And with the dangerous gases, they often called them damps, and that stems from the word Dampf, which means vapor in German. So fire damp was methane, that's obviously flammable. White damp was monoxide, and black damp, carbon dioxide. Stink damp, sulfide, hydrogen sulfide, and go figure it's called stink damp because that stinks. Also extremely toxic and will kill you pretty quickly. After damp is just gases left over after explosions. So that was some interesting names you'll come across when doing research on some of the mining. So how did they figure out if they were in the presence of these gases? Because most of them are odorless or toxic or highly flammable. They came up with these. These were actually invented in England and still actually some places used today. They still work. They're old tech, but they still work. These are called safety lamps. There's different designs, but the concept is really simple. At the top of the lamp, you have a really fine piece of steel gauze, steel mesh. So just a piece of steel cloth, basically. And inside of it, you have a flame lit by gas. And these were designed where you had to have a magnet to open them. So that way the miners could not open them in the mine and accidentally risk setting them on fire or breaking them or causing explosion. But as the flame is burning, it's sucking air in through that piece of really fine gauze. And if the air contains methane, which is flammable, the flame will actually start to physically get bigger and turn blue. If it contains monoxide or dioxide, the flame will start to almost go out, and you have a clear indicator that, hey, we need to not be here. These are really clever and really cool, and they're very expensive nowadays, like $300. Like, that's why I don't have one on this table. So a lot of these little towns in Fremont County were coal camps, as they're called. These are basically a whole little town. Usually the whole town's owned by a mining company, and they're all based around the mine and company store. That's where the song 16 Tons came from. Oh, my soul, the company store. Yep. So like I said, they mostly centered around a mine. So each town would have one or two mines. And these also went with hard rock mining, like gold and silver towns as well. But a lot of the ones here were coal camps. What I found interesting about a lot of these coal towns is there's a bug on the screen. The houses tend to usually be lined up in neat little rows, almost like a grid. It's kind of interesting. They all kind of look really similar and plain. I guess it's a house. You don't need anything fancy. A company store with this one, I believe this is from Coal Creek, Colorado, which I'll show some more pictures of later. Company store was where you went to get all your provisions. It was the main store in town. And with a lot of these mining towns, you were paid in what's called scrip, which is basically credit to the company store. And its dollar value is actually less than $1. And it's kind of a crummy way to get paid, but that's how it was. So the Canyon City coal field, the big one in Fremont County, had a lot of little coal camps and little areas as well. There weren't actually coal camps, but part of other towns. So Prospect Heights and Lincoln Park was in the south part of Canyon City. We also had the towns of Brookside, Rockvale, Coal Creek, Williamsburg, Brewster, Chandler, Radiant, New Shaft, and I don't actually think Heathton was a town, but it was supposed to be, but it never grew that big, I don't think. So the Canyon City area and the coal camps themselves, let me get my cursor back on screen. So I mentioned Lincoln Park. That's actually now part of Canyon City. At the time it was not. It was called Lincoln Park or South Canyon. Brookside is its own little incorporated town south of Canyon City. I mentioned Williamsburg, Rockvale, and Coal Creek. Those are all right here. But one thing to notice is all of these coal mining towns and all these mines tend to be right in this area. So more kind of around these hogbacks that extend down here and more on these plains regions. If you notice, they're not really in the mountainous region to the west of Canyon City. Good reason for that. We'll talk about that in a sec. These are on the test later. No, I'm kidding. So these are not all coal mines. These are all of the mines I've been able to locate so far in the Canyon City area. If you zoom in, there's a lot more. But the coal mines are in there, and don't worry, I'm going to point those out. I just want to throw this up in here just to show how many in general there were. So there's Canyon City. If you didn't see it, I just popped up right there because I know there is a lot going on screen. Here are where all the coal mines are. All of these are coal mines, and like I mentioned, these all kind of tend to be in one area and kind of along the hogbacks. Good reason for that. If we zoom in a little bit, you can see there's a lot of them, and that's not all of them. There's I think I have a running list of I think 145 so far. I can't find half of them. So, all right. So there is our little coal camps again. So Rockville, Williamsburg, Coal Creek. So there's Prospect Heights. That one's not really on a map, but that's also kind of part of Lincoln Park. They're a little different. We'll talk about those in depth in a second. Those are really easy for me to get to because they're in Canyon, so I can drive down there and take a lot of pictures. There's Brookside, our little town of Brookside. Williamsburg and Rockville are technically separate, but if you drive through there now, you can't really tell where one stops and one ends. And there's Coal Creek. And there is Chandler. That one's got a really fun story to it. So why do we see all these coal mining towns and coal mines in these areas and along these hogbacks? Well, the reason is geologically, I'm trying to orient this talk into more historical and less geology because I'm used to giving talks that are a combination of the two. But geologically, what we're seeing is these hogbacks are actually these sedimentary beds that have been pushed up and tilted. And that's why we get these long, narrow ridges of tilted beds, is because what we're seeing is old Cretaceous age sedimentary layers and Jurassic age as well, being exposed on the surface. And a lot of these Cretaceous layers sometimes contain coal, sometimes it's really low grade lignite, but and the Trinidad sandstone that isn't really exposed on the surface here, it's subsurface, but it's along these same hogbacks, the bending sedimentary layers, I mean, we get a lot of really thick 3 to 6 foot coal seams, which are literally just solid layer of coal. It used to be a swamp, now it's coal. This is, I'm sorry, a little blurry, faded, because this is a really old document that I found in the museum's archives, and it is naturally this faded. But what this is a diagram of is the actual Canyon City coal field seams, the different coal seams that tend to follow along each other in that Trinidad sandstone. And you can see it kind of dips just like those hogbacks do because it runs along those hogbacks. And what I like about this one is it actually has the Brookside seam, the Wolf Park, Chandler, all of our coal mines. It labels which ones are which. You can just see that it's just a physical layer. And what's kind of interesting is it's almost completely horizontal. So these mines, they just had to go down and then pretty much straight horizontal. That's why they were able to do room and pillar mining. Really interesting. So Prospect Heights and Lincoln Park. I love this little area. If you're ever in Canyon City, check it out. Cool little historic place, lots of crazy history. So this is the south of the Arkansas River in Canyon City. This is Lincoln Park. Oh, I don't know why that's there. Come on, where's Prospect Heights? All right, here's Lincoln Park itself. And then this little area right over here, it's supposed to pop up and show you, but this little area right here is actually what was called Prospect Heights. And this little area was called that because this was where a lot of the coal mines were located. A little bit was here and a little bit south. So this was the Nonak coal mine. This is one of the biggest ones in the Canyon City coal field and by far the safest. Does anybody know why it's called that? Has anybody actually heard of this one before?
No.
That's Canyon spelled backwards. No, I'm serious. So originally this was the Santa Fe Railroad's property. I think they opened this number 5 shaft at first, and Colorado Fuel and Iron bought it. Developed into the Nonak coal mine. It closed in 1950, but it really ended production, I want to say, the 1920. Prospect Heights Mercantile Store, it's still there today. It's an antique shop now, but it's the original building. Here's one of the original houses from Prospect Heights, and these are late 1800s, very late 1800s. Here's another one of the houses. I think this one was actually, this one was a saloon. That's right. And we'll get into why there was saloons here. So this one was a saloon, and with saloons, we have the jail. Yeah, so the story behind Prospect Heights and, well, like I mentioned, the saloons and the jail is Canyon City and a lot of the county was dry. Prospect Heights was its own little incorporated community at the time. They were not dry. They had several saloons and a lot of rowdy things happened there. And after a while, they realized they had to build a little jail. It's a little 2-room small jail. I recently went in it when they opened it up for a tour. And there's an interesting story. Several movie stars came through here, including Tom Mix, old Western actor. He spent a night in that jail when he got pretty tore up in one of the bars one night and decided he was going to go outside and fire his revolver in there. This in Lincoln Park, right near Prospect Heights, this is what was called Solis Paradise. This is run by Gus Salardino, a lot of Italian immigrants in the area, and his family was one of them. This used to be a nightclub, and this is rumors, and I've heard people say that it's true, but apparently there is a tunnel underneath this that connects with one of the old mine workings where they would do bootlegging, apparently. Oh, there's the figure I was looking for. Yeah, so there's Prospect Heights, Lincoln Park area. If you actually go there, here's the rodeo grounds itself. And let me just say this. Well, it's in another couple slides, but here's the actual mine itself. Here's the workers. This was the photo I used on my cover slide. So that thing behind them, this is the mine tipple like I was talking about. So they'd haul the coal out and then dump it, in this case, directly into rail cars. The Santa Fe Railroad had a line that went through here. There it is again. Now with these, a lot of these pictures are going to kind of be a little blurry or whatnot, or there is not going to be many pictures. And unfortunately, that's just how this is with a lot of these historical archives and pictures, because back then nobody didn't think to take pictures, or they just didn't have a camera. More pictures of it. I find these kind of interesting as well, because in some of the other pictures, this building wasn't there and the tipple didn't look like it was this long. You can see some changes over time with some of these structures. It's pretty interesting. More of it. I want to say this picture was taken shortly before it's closed. This is one of the last loads of coal that came out of the mine. And here's some of the coal loaded up at a railroad depot, getting ready to go to Pueblo, of all places, to steelworks. So Colorado Fuel and Iron owns steelworks. They own the mines, so they kind of have a monopoly on all of it. And this is where a lot of the coal from the Canyon City coal field went, because making steel requires a lot of it. I found this pretty interesting. This is from Steelworks Archive, but coal is black and crumbly chunks. So it's kind of hard to tell where exactly it came out of, right? They would physically take a stencil and paint which mine it came out of on the coal lumps. So you could tell. There's actually one of the stencils itself right there. Something else interesting they used to do was they would do these. I found this on eBay, thank God, because I don't know where else I would have found it. This was called a scatter tag. So whenever they sold coal to commercial people just buying it to heat their homes or whatnot, they would throw these in with the coal. So you could tell which mine it came out of and what size it is. This one says nut. That's a size of coal. Really cool. Here's some more of the coal being sorted in Pueblo. And a lot of it also went to the Canyon City Power Plant, which was open from, I believe, 1899 through 2014. Ran for quite a while. This is a picture of them in 2014 shoveling coal. No, I'm kidding. I think this picture is actually from not long after it opened in the late 1800s. Well, I managed to come across the workings map for the Nonat coal mine in the museum's archives. And I thought, I wonder how far it went underneath the ground. So I overlaid it on Google Earth, and there it is. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Some of them get even bigger than this one, like miles of tunnels. What's kind of funny, though, is it goes right up underneath the rodeo grounds. And while that's kind of concerning, is things happen. So this is a picture just before they started taking everything down after its closure in 1950. I kind of like the sign right here that says "Gone but Not Forgotten." It's really interesting. And one quick thing I didn't elaborate on a second ago was I mentioned this was the safest mine in the coal field area. It was called that because it was relatively pretty gas free, and there was a really low amount of injuries. Well, maybe not injuries, but deaths. I mean, if you broke your leg, then you can just come back to work next week or something. But there was only 2 deaths that I found and recorded fatality records in the mines at this one. And they're both accidents, but the other ones like Rockvale and Brookside, there was dozens of fatalities in these mines. It was really dangerous conditions. Like I mentioned, why it's not a good idea to have old mine workings under stuff. And I think it was 1940, the first sinkhole happened in this area. And it was actually in Actually, I'll talk about this one first. The other one is what I got the next slide for. This one's from 1968. This is a 40-foot sinkhole that just 40 foot, 15 feet in diameter, I believe. No, 50 feet, sorry. Whatever, 15 feet. It's a big hole. Popped up on the side of Oak Creek grade right there. Pretty well-traveled road. They had to fill that back in. And like I mentioned, the other sinkhole happened right here where somebody's house is on the corner of Cyanide Street. This guy's house dropped 2 feet in an instant. The poor guy that was inside got stuck in the house because the door frame's physically bent. So that whole little part of the street right here, the house and in the intersection of the street actually sunk down 2 feet, and that had to obviously be fixed. And the articles I found attributed that to the old Nonak mine workings, but that map that I had of the actual workings themselves, they kind of trend more towards the southeast. What I think that was actually the first coal mine that was ever established in the area. That was the Prentice Shaft. That was created by a pretty wealthy local entrepreneur, Dr. Prentice. He was also who made the Hot Springs Hotel in Canyon. He had this little operation going many years before any of this other stuff, and this was not worked in many decades at this point, but that doesn't mean the workings aren't still there. We'll go a little bit further south to Wolf Park. This is just south of where we're looking at. This is the deepest coal mine in Colorado, 1,100 feet deep. And what is on top of it now, we'll get into in a second why that's kind of scary too. That comes later. Wolf Park has some really good pictures of it. Really actually kind of a really cool structure. I love this picture because it's really awesome. They have the different size of coal, and they got the nice Wolf Park logo. This is some of the museum's collect. Well, this is one I found online, but the museum has one as well. This is what's called a coal pick. These were specifically used for coal mining. I don't have any info as to why they're the shape they are, but I don't know. But this one is from Wolf Park coal mine. Pretty interesting. Wish I could find one. Royal Gorge 1 and 2 mines. These were a little bit further to the west. These were a little bit smaller, but these usually handled the coal that came from Wolf Park via a tramway that they hauled the coal with, literally like an aerial cable tramway. Most of these mines that were shafts used a hoist. Well, all of them did. You got to have some way to get the stuff up and down the shaft. These are just basically large spools of cable that you have an engine that turns it. Most mines use these. Like I mentioned, some of them were wagon mines. Royal Gorge 1 and 2 at one point, I don't know if it was ran by the prison or they did business with the prison, but it's a picture of an inmate hauling coal to the prison. I don't know if he's an inmate, but the picture said prison employee. So, all right, let's move a little bit further west to Brookside. Brookside is really interesting because the mine itself is no longer there, but where it was, there's now a hiking trail. It's really easy to get up and see the mines and what used to be there. In its early days, Brookside was not much more than a few houses until it became incorporated as a mining town. It had its company store, just like most of the other towns. However, it was also its own independent town. It wasn't necessarily strictly a company town. The actual mine itself was pretty big, and if you go up the trail to this day, you can pretty much stand where this building is. I have a picture from this spot in a second, and it's a little hard to see because this picture is really dark, but this is the actual tipple itself, and there are 2 concrete pillars right here that run along the opposite side of the railway, so train cars will come in right here. The tipple would dump the coal in them. Like I mentioned, that picture I took was from right here. This was that main structure in that picture. Like I mentioned, you had your tipple, rail line here, and if you hike up it, they got signs that show all this. So the entrance to the mine is right here, and thankfully the coal just basically came straight out the mine, loaded right onto the train. So this one was okay. So this is where the main structure would have been, where I took this picture. This is those 2 concrete pillars where the tipple was. I took this only a couple months ago, so this is still what it looks like today. Really neat little hike. So like the Nonak mine, I found the workings map for Brookside and did the same thing. And if you thought that other mine was pretty big, well, this one is pretty substantial. Yep. It's a little hard to see, I know, but it's pretty. All right, so let's move up north a little bit of Brookside to this little spot. Does anybody know what this little infamous spot's called, by chance? Nope. This little area right here was just like Prospect Heights in that it was not dry. This little area was called Hell's Half Acre. And it boasted, yeah, that's what they called it. It boasted several saloons and was pretty well known for being a little crazy spot. And like I mentioned, Prospect Heights, a lot of the movie stars that would come through to film here or were just visiting, they would go visit Hell's Half Acre as well. There's a story of, there's our guy Tom Mix again. Him and another movie star I can't remember the name of. They would try to shoot shot glasses off of a bar counter in one of the saloons, and when they were tearing the saloon down, the bullet holes were still in the wall. He's a little bit of a wild guy. A little bit further south, we have Rockvale. This was a company town. This was the store for the company town. If you go there today, it does look just like this. Rockvale is still a very small community. That picture was probably taken yesterday, actually. No, I'm kidding. Here's one of the only pictures I can find of inside one of the Fremont County mines. This is in one of the Rockvale mines, and you can see keep out. This could be due to cave-ins, unstable roofs, toxic gas. But when you see something like this, you definitely want to stay out of there. So just more of our typical mine setup. We got our hoist down Hoistway and tipple, all that mess. I found this one interesting because I don't know when this picture was from, but you can see they do have electricity ran. Electricity is not as new as people think, at least not to me. I was really surprised to find how many of these places had full electricity in early like 1910s. Coal Creek. This is one of the first coal mining camps in the area. If you go there today, this building is still there. This is one of the original ones from the coal, the establishment of the coal mining town. Pretty neat. They used to have a railway that went through town. Not so much anymore. Here's the mine itself. More coal loaded onto cars, probably going to Pueblo. It's probably why this came out of Steelworks archives, because CF&I, Colorado Fuel and Iron, they own most of these mines, and at one time they were the largest landowner in Colorado. Here's that coal seam. This is right alongside of the highway in Coal Creek. You can see some of it just popping out. You can pick some of it up like I did. Williamsburg, like I mentioned, is just north of Rockvale. You kind of can't tell where the two end and begin. Here's the post office in Williamsburg. I actually don't know if it's still there or not. It's a good question. That's Bear Gulch Mine. I think that was the same picture from Rockvale. Here's the Emerald Mine office. So Emerald Mine was a little bit north of Williamsburg. Here's the entrance to Emerald Mine. Really neat little entrance. This one was actually concrete and not just a hole in the ground. And I found this to be pretty interesting. This was a giant lump of coal they took out of Emerald Mine, and this sat on display somewhere. And I can't figure out exactly what place it sat at, but it was pretty neat. It's kind of a marketing advertisement thing. Brewster, if you're driving from Canyon City to Florence along Highway 115 South, you'll pass by a little street called Brewster. And directly across from that is where the Brewster mine used to be. This used to be a whole little community on its own. But just like a lot of these places, unfortunately, it's gone and there's not much record of it. But that's where Brewster was, right there along 115. And if we go, so here's Rockvale. We went back further south a little bit. So here's Rockvale. This is South Canyon City and Williamsburg. And just to the west of that is this little place that used to be called Chandler. Some of you have probably heard of this. It has a neat story behind it. But Chandler was a full-on mining community. Neat little rows of houses, 2 mine shafts, church, school, office, everything. It had a population of 600 people before it closed in 1920. So this was a nice little community, full-on community. And a lot of these, what's interesting is if you go through old newspapers, a lot of these had sports teams and they would play each other. Like Chandler was playing Rockvale, baseball, so I don't know the team names. Really interesting. Like I said, little neat rows of houses. The schoolhouse is the one down there in the back. I recently saw a really nice up-close picture of the schoolhouse with some trees out front. I'm trying to get that picture if I can. There's the mine itself. It's no longer there. Nothing is left there, actually, unfortunately. More the mine. I believe the mine office was right here. It's way back on the edge of that property. Just some of the people operating the hoist house in the coal mine. Here's the workings of Chandler. I haven't actually overlaid this on a map yet, but it was several miles of working. It extended almost to Brookside. If you go out there today, you will see this. Not a whole lot. There's no town there, unfortunately. You will see a giant tailings pile right here, just a big black and orange pile of debris. And you'll see a concrete building. That concrete building is an old powder house. That's where they stored the explosives, because explosives are dangerous. So that's where they would store those. And you can also see, if you get really close to the edge of the road, because there's a barbed wire fence, because it's private property now, these house foundations or basements, I'm assuming these are. So here's one right next to the road. There's another one right here. And then there's a little bit further up, there's some more. But this is where the actual houses themselves were. And you might be wondering, well, what happened to all that stuff? What did they do with it all? There's some more of it. They moved it. This is a Chandler house in South Canyon. A lot of these houses were sold and literally put on trucks and moved to Canyon City or Florence, or I'm assuming elsewhere as well, if you had the money and you could afford it. But this is one in Canyon City. There's quite a few. Something else neat, this is on display in the Royal Gorge Museum. This is a iguanodon footprint that was taken from the Chandler coal mine. There's 3 of them. The other 2 are in Denver Museum. They're pretty neat. So Chandler's history with the Coalfield War, if you're not familiar with it, there was a really bad conflict that happened in the early 1900s in the Colorado coalfield. So there was a lot of protests. I'm going to really compress the history of this. Like, there's whole books on this, and it's a really fascinating subject, but I'm going to compress it just for brevity so that we can get through this presentation. There was about a 2-year striking period in 1913. And a lot of these miners, in this case, a lot of them were Greek immigrants, lived in this tent colony near Trinidad in the little community of Ludlow. That was also a big coal camp. And there was some tension between them and the National Guard, as well as the mine companies, and the mine companies was hiring the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, because the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency had previously successfully broken up strikes in West Virginia using violence, and they were effective at it, as effective as you violently could be breaking up strikes. But they hired them, and between all these, they had quite the feud going on. Violence happened between the 2 groups and the National Guard. But what this all culminated into is on these are some of the striking miners living in their tents, and they lived in these tents for about a year at this point. Well, the National Guard started taking up positions around the tent colony because tensions were getting pretty high at this point. And they got in troops, they got in several machine gun emplacements, they commandeered some civilian stuff, which was kind of unfair, but they did. A lot of shady things happened, to say the least. But what happened is on April 20th, 1914, the Ludlow Massacre took place and started in the morning. Shots were fired. It's kind of unsure what led up to it, but shots were fired. A big firefight started to last throughout the entire day. Several people in the tent colony were killed. I think a couple National Guardsmen were killed. And the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, actually before this, part of the reason tensions were high was they built this armored car and would drive through the tent colony, spraying machine gun fire through the tents to harass them, and kind of killed a couple people. But the National Guard moved in after the day's worth of fighting and burned the tent colony, which killed 13 people, 6 of whom were women and children hiding underneath one of the tents in a dugout. So this obviously lit a powder keg, and everybody decided, we are done with this. These protests are going nowhere, and now they have just committed this atrocity. So the 10 days war began, and what this was from April 20th, 1914 through April 30th. Groups of striking miners basically went from the Colorado coalfields almost to Denver, taking over mining company towns and destroying mine structures and shooting mine company personnel. It was a pretty brutal affair. But Chandler actually had a role in this that a lot of people don't realize. A big group of miners moved in on the town and took it over. And at first, when they first got there, the National Guard had a machine gun emplacement up here. This used to be the water tower. You can see barely see the concrete pillars for it. They had a machine gun up here, and they were in a firefight with the miners. I don't think anybody actually got injured during that, because it's pretty far distances if you go out there. It's not, you're kind of shooting in the dark at that point. They eventually relinquished the town. The miners had it for a little while. They pretty much just ransacked it. They didn't actually burn down or destroy anything. And that was that after the 10 days war was over. Radiant and New Shaft, these were two little communities that, just like Brewster, are no longer there. Here's where they both would be, south of Rockville and Coal Creek. And I mentioned Heathton earlier. Heathton, I found references to it being a proposed coal mining town that was funded by a pretty rich entrepreneur. I don't think it went anywhere. There's nothing there now. I think this is Radiant, actually. I haven't found whether this is Radiant or New Shaft. But with Radiant, just like Chandler, once the mine shut down, they picked up the houses and sold them. Actually, let me backtrack a little bit. After the mine was closed, it did act as basically a squatter camp during the Great Depression for a little bit, and then they sold it. So let's move into hard rock mining a little bit, because we're getting short on time, and also I'm almost done. So hard rock mining is a little different from coal mining. You can still take a skip down and do that, but with hard rock, you're more chasing veins full of precious minerals, things that are valuable. With coal, you're chasing more of a horizontal seam of coal. I got these pictures in the Molly Kathleen mine in Cripple Creek. If you ever get the chance to take the tour and you're not claustrophobic, I recommend it. It's worth $30. But this is basically how hard rock mining works. This would be along a fissure that or a fracture that contains a lot of precious metals. You basically just find one, start mining it out. This is what's called a stope. This literally is still how it's done in some places. You just timber it up, you stand on those boards, and you just sit there with a stoping drill and drill up and blast. Like I mentioned, hand drilling, like this piece right here, they let you do it in there. And of course I had to do it. So literally just sit there with a hammer and you twist it as you hammer it. That's how it was done for years until pneumatic tools came along. This is if you take the tour, this is an 800-foot stope. Like that's 800 feet vertically up, and that was all mined out. It's pretty crazy to think about, but got to get the metal out of there somehow. So in the Canyon City area, I mentioned the coal camps are more over here around the edges of hogbacks and more kind of in those low plains area. Well, if we look more in our mountainy regions west of Canyon City, where we start getting more of those Rockies, you get more igneous rock, igneous and metamorphic rocks, volcanic rocks. That's what contains our metals. So here are some of the metal mines, or hard rock, I should say, hard rock mines that were in Canyon City area. So if we zoom into this one right here, I want to point this one out because it's pretty easy to access, and it's kind of the reason why some of these are here. So you zoom in again. This is Temple Canyon area south of Canyon City. Really nice area to go hike and explore, really beautiful. But there used to be a volcano there. If you go out there today, you can still see it. It's a pretty pronounced hill right next to the road, and it's made up of pretty dark rock. And I have a piece of it over here. There it is from the road. I unfortunately don't have any pictures. I took them with my own phone. Otherwise, I would have used those. But that's it. It's pretty noticeable. And it's BLM, so you can go hike up it. But with hard rock, this is basically what you're chasing. So let's say you have a crack or a fracture in rock, and you have volcano pushes up melted material. Well, usually when something's liquid, it wants to find the path of least resistance, right? So it flows into cracks and fractures and hardens, and you get these veins of metals or other precious things like lithium or whatnot. So that's what you're seeing in a lot of these areas along these mountains. You have a lot of faults, fractures from where these mountains were pushed up and the earth just cracked and fractured. And you got a lot of volcanism. So that volcano I pointed out was over here. And that volcanism is kind of the reason why some of these mines over here are where they are. Same with these over here. It's just how things work. This one right here, Copper King mine, is one of the very few I have pictures of. And this one was apparently a big deal in its day. But like most of these, there's just not a whole lot beyond local newspaper articles about it. But that's it right there. And actually, if you know what to look for when you're driving down Temple Canyon, you can see this mine in the distance, way up on top of the mountain. You kind of got to know what you're looking for, but really just look for the zigzaggy looking road. You can spot it. Copper King, really neat little one. I like this because you got the mine itself from the top of the mountain, and then it basically just had a conveyor belt that brought everything down. But Copper King is kind of interesting because if you're familiar with the Dawson Gold Project right here, basically same area. They basically own the old Copper King workings, and they're not going to use the same workings as far as I know, but it's the same ore, basically. They're going to try to get gold out of. So this area over here, I want to point out too, because this one's interesting. This was Sunset City. This was its own little community, but just like the rest, there's nothing there. Sunset City was a little community, had its own little gold mine in this area. This area actually is called Copper Gulch, Upper Copper Gulch. It's called that because there's a lot of copper from that area, and actually brought some of the rocks I've collected there, including some copper ore. Sunset City and Sunset City Mine, like I mentioned, are kind of copper and gold mines, and this whole area is full of those. So there's the actual mine itself. It's shut. You can barely see the top of the opening right there. It's also privately claimed right now, so if you go there, you can't really collect anything. Here's some of the copper ore they were getting out of that area in Copper Gulch. This is from Green Mountain Mine. It's there. I don't have any pictures of it because it is a really, really long hike to get there, and I've not done that hike yet. One more I want to point out, Iron Mountain Mine, way south in that hard rock mining district. The reason why I want to point this one out and why I feel important, well, it's gone now, and also it's private land, so can't go get any up close pictures. This was also owned by CF&I. So they would mine the iron out of this mine and take it over to Pueblo, where we are, and use it to make steel. So pretty interesting. They own the steel mill, the coal mines, and the iron mine. So they really had the monopoly on everything. Another interesting thing is there was a railroad route that went from the Iron Mountain Mine area through and West Cliff all the way up to Temple Canyon and Canyon City. But it kept getting washed out by Grape Creek. That's what it follows right there. This is Grape Creek. And it kept getting washed out due to floods, so it's no longer there. This one, Hanson Project, is something not a lot of people nowadays remember in Canyon City area, but some older folks do. This area right here north of town, so here's Canyon City. And if you get up here near Tallahassee Creek, north to west of town, this little area right here is kind of special for a good reason. This is the largest unmined uranium ore body in the US. This is an 8-mile body of uranium ore that's still sitting there. And with this project, Cypress and Mines was going to try to actually create an open pit mine with this. It got a lot of public pushback, and for good reason. There's a lot of creeks there and farms, and people that live there, in a giant open uranium mine probably is not a good idea. But the original mine with the uranium was originally found was the Picnic Tree Mine. And all this area has since, some of it is still owned by one mining company out of Australia, I believe. They still own it, but they haven't done anything with it. It's changed hands like 5 times. But a lot of these ranches here used to originally be the mine company's property. And if you go through the old land ownership and plat deeds, you can see where Cypress sold it directly to the people who live there now. Pretty interesting. I think this is all private land now, so can't really go out there and get some pictures of the old mine stuff. But I found this in a folder at the museum that wasn't even labeled as dealing with the Hanson Project, but this is a newspaper flyer from 1980, and I think this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. This was just before they were trying to develop this project, and they came out with this, and it's just such a really cool 1980s poster. I'd love to have some remade because this is just too cool. All right, getting to the end here, Canyon City Prison Limestone Quarry. So if you go through Canyon City, you notice there's a lot of prisons there. Yeah, the one in town right next to Skyline Drive has a wall around it. That wall wasn't always there. It's not a natural wall. It was actually built with inmate labor in the late 1800s. Right there from Skyline Drive, they would just carve out chunks of limestone, and they built up the wall around the prison quarry. And there's actually still inscriptions that the inmates did into the wall from the 1800s. So they would by hand physically cut these stone blocks out and haul them over there and build a wall. Yep. This picture's kind of cool because this is still where you can see the limestone quarry itself right in here, and you can kind of see it, but they had a few little rail like mine carts they're hauling the stuff with. Pretty interesting. We got a few aggregate quarries in Canyon City. So to the west town, we got Tezoc Quarry right there on the other side of Skyline Drive. They usually do road fill, granite. They're just blasting and digging out granite. So just regular road fill granite. If you go down Highway 50 west towards Salida, Colorado, you'll pass by Parkdale Quarry. They're getting more limestone stuff out of there. And what's kind of interesting is their rail line goes straight to Pueblo via Rock and Rail Yard. I was trying to get a picture of the Emerald Coal Mine, which you can barely see. It's not a good picture, but this is part of that rail line, and all these cars were loaded with stuff from that Parkdale Quarry. Pretty neat. So I feel like I ought to bring up Portland. I just recently found out about this one myself because that's what I love about Colorado and this area of Colorado is it's just so full of history and everything that you're always learning more. So I recently learned about Portland, which is called that because it makes cement there, Portland cement. But what I found really fascinating about it was Portland and this no longer existing community nearby called Concrete. These were both not mining towns, but basically set up like mining towns. They were kind of company towns built around the concrete plants. And Concrete, you can still see where the buildings used to be, but they're not there. But it was a sprawling community. There's plenty of pictures of it. And it's kind of a shame that none of that's there anymore, but it's also fascinating. The whole community sprouted up. Here's a picture of them around just this one little area. But that looks just like a mining town. So milling and smelting, these happened a little bit in Florence more than Canyon, but a little bit in Canyon as well. In Canyon City area, we had Empire Zinc. That's what that big square right here is. This used to be the Empire Zinc smelting plant. So during its operation from the late 1800s, well into the mid 1900s, they would smelt a lot of zinc that was mined out of Gilman, Colorado. This is located right there south of town off Ford Road. There's more picture of it. I don't know why it's duplicate there. I guess backspace. This one, I mentioned Wolf Park Coal Mine, which is about right. It would be located or was about right here in this picture. Does anybody know what this is off the top of their head? Yeah, it is. This is Cotter Uranium Mill. This operated from the late 1940s, I believe, early 1950s until I think early 2000s. It officially stopped operation. But this was a uranium disposal mill. And it actually took in some of the waste from the Manhattan Project in the 1950s. Pretty interesting. Can't go there right now, obviously, because it's a Superfund site. But this used to be a full-on mill. They had a lot of buildings out there doing all kinds of leaching, chemical disposal operations. I mean, it was a full-on big facility, but there's nothing there now. Now it's an impound lot for hazardous materials. And part of the reason it was shut down is because it's not that far from Canyon, and there was quite a few lawsuits over contamination and groundwater and dust in there. Florence had a little bit more to do with the smelting operation. So if you pass by a street in Florence called Cyanide, that's because there used to be a whole little district north of the Arkansas River in Florence that had several smelters there. And if you go to the Pioneer Museum in Florence, they have a really nice display that shows all the smelters that were there. But they would do a lot of smelting of the gold ore from Cripple Creek. And what that gets us into is Adelaide and Phantom Canyon. So Phantom Canyon, if you don't know, it branches off of Highway 50 outside of Canyon and Penrose. So you take this road and you go straight up and it becomes this really, really, really winding road that goes up for an hour until you reach the gold town of Victor, Colorado. So in the late 1800s, when they were mining out gold ore in Cripple Creek and Victor, they would haul the ore down to Florence via Phantom Canyon. Cripple Creek and Victor Railroad actually had a line that went down Phantom Canyon. If you've actually driven Phantom Canyon, it's kind of insane to imagine a train going down that. Yeah, but they did. And in this, they had a couple little small communities. There was one about here called McCourt, and there was one that's a little bit more well-known about, still nobody knows about it, called Adelaide. And unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of it because the only picture I've seen was from a book. I didn't think to photocopy it like I should have. But Adelaide was a little community, had a hotel, a railroad depot, and I think the hotel doubles the restaurant. If you go there now, this is it. I think it's all private as well. There's like an old well, and this is where everything used to be. And the rail line would come down through here. But I believe it was 1863 or 65. There was a huge flood that came down through Phantom Canyon and completely destroyed this little town and killed, I think, 5 people or so. And there's a story of a train that was coming down Phantom Canyon as the flood is coming behind it. And they got word about it. It's a crazy story. It's almost like an action movie sort of thing. So they just gunned it as fast as they could, going down Phantom Canyon, literally trying not to off the rails because they're going so fast. And they ended up outrunning the flood. It was, like I said, it was like an action movie. I'm about to find that story again because it's insane.
Well, like 1960.
I thought it was like 1860 something.
No,
It wasn't? I'm talking about the one that washed out Adelaide. 1894. But from some other things I found in newspaper articles, I think that Adelaide was also going to try to develop as a little mining community itself. They referenced in the article the Twin Sisters mine. I've ended up finding it on a plat map. It was actually Twin Cities mine, and it was up here, and there was a few more up here. But there was some copper, I believe, that came out of those, maybe some gold. The only thing left of Adelaide today is the only bridge that did not get washed out in that flood, and that was this steel bridge that is located just north of where the town used to be. Still drive over it today. And you want to go through brick making real quick, because this is also a huge part of Canyon City, and I did not think as a geologist and paleontologist I would have to learn about bricks, but I did. So bricks are actually a little more complex than I thought. I actually had to ask somebody I know who's getting their master's degree in art and ceramics what the heck a lot of these terms meant and what it was. I didn't know anything about firing brick or making ceramics. So with a lot of the clay that was mined around Canyon City, they mined it because it contained a clay mineral called kaolinite. It's really sticky, makes it really good for making bricks. And a lot of the bricks they made in this area were fire bricks. They're really hard bricks, good for high temperature uses because there's a lot of smelting and furnaces and stuff around here. So a lot of these clays tend to occur along these hogbacks that we have. This is not Skyline Drive or any of the ones from here. This is one of the hogbacks up in North Colorado. This is actually in Morrison. So like I mentioned, those hogbacks are those dipping sedimentary layers of Cretaceous and Jurassic age rock that outcrop as really narrow ridges. This is actually a picture I got at Summit Brick Company in Pueblo. This is one of their active operations they have out near Penrose. I was lucky enough to get to go over there during inspection. With these bricks, I found it kind of interesting how many varieties and different types there were, and they all kept describing the types of bricks as rated with cones. And apparently these are physical little pieces you put in the kiln with whatever you're firing. And whenever it starts melting, it tells you how long. I don't know how to describe it perfectly. Some of you might know how to describe it better than what I'm saying, but this is how it's done. It's a lot of stuff. You fire it for this long at this temperature, and you get this hardness. I'm a geologist, okay? I lick rocks. But brick making has been going along for about as long as people have, including some of the earlier settlers here. Like I mentioned, this beehive oven in Temple Canyon could have very well been used for firing brick. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I thought there was 8. There's 7 brickyards in Canyon City. Some of these were the same company. They just got bought out. And you still very well today find some of these bricks over 100 years ago. Really hard to find out where some of these actually were, or where they actually got their clay from. The only 3 I could find was Canyon Brick and Tile was over here north of the highway. Catlin Brickyard was one of the first businesses in Canyon, actually. That was south of the river. And then Diamond Fire Brick. This is, if you're familiar with Canyon City, this is where DFC Ceramics is. They still to this day make crucibles and ceramics. That's where Diamond Fire Brick used to be, is the same lot. So Catlin Brickyard, like I mentioned, was one of the first places in Canyon industrially. The guy who founded it, Mr. Catlin, he was one of the earlier entrepreneurs of the city. And like a lot of the old mines, it's really hard to find pictures of these places. So unfortunately, I don't have a picture of Catlin Brickyard. Come on, where's it at? But I do have a picture of his yard. That's his that's his physical house. It's still in Canyon City, and somebody still lives there. I got this online. I didn't. If you live there, sorry, I did not drive by your house and take pictures. These are the clay mines I was able to find around the area. Different companies have them labeled on Google Maps, who owned which one. A lot of really crazy stuff, and a lot of them were either along the rivers or they were along the hogbacks. Canyon Brick and Tile was one of the only actual brick plants I could find a picture of, and I think this picture was taken before it burned down. I want to say this one burned down once or twice. Still find the brick stamp by Canyon Brick and Tile. Here's some from Diamond Fire Brick. I think actually, never mind. I thought I owned the one on the right, but I do own one of these, just not the ones pictured. Jouett Fire Bricks. These are pretty easy to spot because they say Jouett or JFP. Lockleed Christie's. I tend to find these a lot around Canyon City. I don't know why. Maybe they just produce more. One thing I've noticed about all these is depending on what the brick was used for, they were stamped with S or I or numbers or just different letters. I'm not exactly sure what they all stand for because I'm not a brick expert. Royal Gorge bricks. I don't know who made these. I see these a lot as well. These are really neat looking though because they say Royal Gorge. Some of these were marked with what they're used for. This one says arch, so I guess for archways. This is not there anymore. It's been shut, but this was one of the brick clay mines in Temple Canyon area. It's been shut because it's huge and it's kind of hazardous. Skyline Drive had one of the brick clay mines on it, and it had to be shut in the late 1980s because 2 people died in it. Yeah, and somebody got injured as well. They didn't die, but they fell in and thankfully survived. But it was right. This is a picture of it. It was right off the edge of the hogback. So the top of the hogback that you drive along was right here, and the actual mine itself, the opening was about right there. So pretty easy for tourists to wander off over near it. But this picture just before they shut it, and sign, hazardous mines will kill you, so stay out of them. So wrapping it up, just a few other little cool things around Fremont County. Mining wise, because I'm trying to cover the whole county, not just Canyon City area, but like I mentioned, Canyon City is the main focus because that's where a lot of it happened. Texas Creek area, if you're driving along Highway 50, this is between Salida up here. Salida's up here and Canyon City would be over towards the right a little bit. But between them, you get a little bit more mining. It's a little bit hard to find some references to some of this stuff because it's historical and records just weren't kept. Texas Creek, there was a tungsten mine a little bit south of there, probably about right in here. I've been to it. It's all been mined out, except I think that was more recent. I don't think it was from the 1800s or early 1900s. Cotopaxi was established originally as a Russian Jewish farming community, but they did mine a little bit of copper in the late 1800s and then early 1900s. They had the Cotopaxi mine. It's still there today. It's privately owned and it's shut. So what I find interesting about it is you get this nice blue crust kind of leaching out of the mine, and this is from the copper. The copper and the ore is staining the water that's flowing through it, and you get that nice blue color. Wellsville, I noticed this last time I was driving through there. How I didn't notice it before, I don't know. But in Wellsville, they have a large, I believe it's concrete, or it might be, no, it's lime. Sorry, it's a lime production facility, and I think they mine a little, they quarry out a little bit of stuff up here for the production facility. I don't know who owns it or whatnot. But one thing I noticed as I was coming along 50 was, oh my God, that is a giant mine opening up on top of that mountain. And I was right. This used to be a massive limestone mine they used to mine out for that same little lime production area. And this picture doesn't really give it justice as to scale. This is about big enough to drive a semi truck in. It's massive and it's all BLM. So hopefully I can get up there and get some better pictures, but it extends for several hundred feet. That's it as far as mining. And I figured I'd throw this in because I'm in Pueblo and this is cool. So here in Pueblo, there was what was called the Mineral Palace at one point. It was located where the Mineral Palace Park is. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this, being the Archaeological Society. But I wanted to throw this in because it was a geologically interesting place. And just like a lot of the places I discussed in this presentation and that I'm sure you guys can understand is that a lot of these places were spectacular and amazing and they just don't exist anymore. And unfortunately, not many people know about them. But the Mineral Palace really was something special. I was pretty frankly shocked to figure out how big it was and how, even by today's standards, how extravagant it was. I believe this is still there. Some of you probably been there and maybe seen it. But the Mineral Palace was a pretty large building. It was a community center, and the grounds had ponds, garden, like absolutely extravagant place. So this was the building itself, and it was called the Mineral Palace because it was partially funded by some of the silver mining companies out of Aspen, and I think there was coal mining companies, and then another group funded it, I believe. It was basically a bunch of rich entrepreneurs that funded it, and it was basically funded as a publicity thing. But the inside of it was massive, and you just got these nice, huge ceilings, these very decorative columns. And at the base of each column was these glass display cases, and they contain tons of minerals and fossils from all around Colorado. Like, this place was absolutely incredible. Like, and it's a shame that it's gone. It just went to shambles during the Great Depression and was looted, and then eventually it just was not feasible to restore it, and it got torn down. What was interesting was they had a main stage, and sitting to one side of it, they had King Coal, and then they had, I think it was it Queen Silver? I think it was Silver Queen. Yeah. Yeah. See, you guys know more than I do. But man, I just can't get over how beautiful this place was. Incredible. That's some more pictures of the grounds. And that's it. So just a few little basic things. Don't go into abandoned mines because they're dangerous. Removal of vertebrate fossils and artifacts from public lands is a crime. Don't do it. That's part of my job, is trying to stop people from removing fossils because it's a problem. Don't lick radioactive rocks, please. I mean, you do what you want, but I'm just saying it's probably not a good idea. And respect private property and mineral rights. So that's pretty much it. I know I went a little long. Sorry about that, but it's a lot to cover. But so.
Josh, we got a couple of questions.
Sure, yeah, let's do questions.
Steve Chapman wants to know if there's any gold or silver in Fremont.
So he wants to know if there's any gold or silver in Fremont County. I mentioned those hard rock mines. Let me find the picture in Grape Creek area. Some of these, there was some low grade gold and silver ore pulled out of it. And I didn't mention this presentation just because I knew it was going to be a little long, but along the Arkansas River, along Highway 50, there's a lot of gold in the sand and placer deposits that flows down from Leadville. And I brought some of it that I've actually sluiced and panned myself just so you guys can see it. It's really tiny stuff, but it is possible. And I believe at one time it was commercially mined there out of those river deposits, but usually it's just low grade. It's not usually viable, but yeah, there is gold and silver.
That's really interesting presentation. And ask, which coal miners are actively burning.
Yeah, give me 1 sec. I got to plug in my laptop before it dies. So the gold mine, the coal mine that was burning
mean, that's just encouraging. The payment bonds of the water. Yeah.